Hi, I think we're good. So, just going to go through a few. Clayton asked me the other day if I could go through a few kind of best practices, and I quickly smashed this together as they're not the prettiest slides, but let's go through them. So, the first thing is hacking a minimal product and pivot. So, there is this kind of really nice concept from kind of the whole lean startup world, where if you want to design a car, you don't think about getting that final car or that final product and build that. Rather, you try to find what is the simplest functional version of what that car could look like and build that first. So in this context, like how not to build this product, you don't start with the wheel, then the chassis, and then build it up into a car. You'd rather start with some kind of crappy functional version of it that kind of moves maybe in one direction, doesn't turn, right? And then slowly you add features until you've got the car. A lot of kind of startup groups use this as an example, but I think it's a terrible example as well. Whereas this is kind of the direction that you want to go. And what's really great is that when you see that something's working, you can always trash it, realize that it's a stupid idea, and it allows you to get so many more small ideas done, filter out the best ideas, and then continuously move towards your product. A lot of people ask me, how did I build kind of this whole cozy app, right? And it wasn't because I said, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and I built it straight up. It was like lots of small, very little iterations of, and this product could have gone in so many different directions, but ultimately came into what it is because of the way it went. So think small and move up incrementally. The second one, how many of you know the 20-80 rule or the 80-20 rule? I think this is kind of a familiar concept, right? I like kind of rather more the 20-80 rule plus 5. So the 20-80 is that 20% of the work you do delivers 80% of the outcome. These slides, for example, were very 20-80, if not like 10-70, right? But then I always say once you've done the 20-80, you should add an extra 5%. And that extra 5% is things like, in terms of presentation, adjust your slide margins, make sure like these things are not, falling off the screen, that you always have, in terms of presentations, for example, a really nice layout, even though your figures might be simple, selecting nice colors for your plots, tidying up your code, removing all the comments that are not required, and, unnecessary kind of code, documenting what you've done, it just takes a little bit more, just that extra 5% more, and it doesn't create that much more output. That's the idea. So a lot of people that follow this by heart, they go, well, doing all of this gives me an extra 2% output. Like it doesn't really provide so much more, but it saves you so much more in the long run. Even things like planning your life, you could just do your work and get your projects done, but you should also at some point take a step back and think about what you want to do with yourself. So, these are just 5 very simple examples. But I feel a lot of people don't do that extra 5%, and in my opinion, it brings a lot of value, even though it doesn't necessarily bring a lot of output. Then along with this, I did an entire workshop in Arno's chair on this, which is the fact that for most people that are doing a PhD or doing some sort of work like in a research institution where you might have multiple projects at the same time and multiple tasks, you need to have some sort of project management system of some sort. And I know, for example, Moritz, a colleague of mine who's very good at self-management, he has a special type of book that does self-management, which you like write things in a certain order. And now a project management system is not sticky notes on your desk with notes. It's not a to-do list. And it's also not remembering everything in your head. Remembering things in your head is a bad idea in general, because it will subliminally induce aspects of subconscious stress, because you are actively remembering things, and even though you're not consciously stressed out about it, it is triggering certain aspects in your brain that it alleviates your standard state of stress. Or you forget the thing, right? Those are generally the 2 aspects. Holding things in memory is generally, brain memory is generally a bad idea. And the more we hold in our memory, the more utilized our brain is for remembering things, and the less space we have for things like creativity or thinking, beyond boxes, or thinking beyond scopes of projects, for example, which is what research and also research and development is really all about. So A tool that I really like is this concept called the secret weapon. You can, search that in your own time. But the general rules of thumb that I like in terms of what you may take as your project management system is that it needs to have an aspect of what I call multidimensionality, meaning that you need to not like a simple to-do list is a single dimension. It's a list with tasks to do in order. Your list or each item in your list needs to have a location of where you do that task, or this is what the aspects I find important. The project that task is associated to, the time importance. So for example, what is it? Does it need to be done now, or can it be done in a year's time? How important is it? And for whom is the task for can also be an important dimension you add. Now, there's a lot of software that allows you to create such multidimensional task lists. I personally use Evernote. I'm not here to sell Evernote, but just to give you an idea of how I personally do it, for example. So here, for example, is my end of contract sprint. This is a task with a whole bunch of things I need to do. Now, this is just a standard one-dimensional task list inside. But you might look up here, there are two tags. It's called One Now and At Work. This means that this task needs to be done now, and it's something that I do at work. So to give you an idea of what my tags look like, I have when tags. I have 1 now, 2 next, 3 soon, 4 later, 5 someday as my tag option. So 1 now is like this needs to be done right now, the moment you sit down and open up your laptop, even before you check your email sometimes. 2, sorry? Yeah, it's all free. Well, Evernote is free, and there's a lot of note-taking services that allow this now because of the power of it. So you pick your own system. There's even like Morris uses a physical book that uses the same concept. Then 2 next is like what I do after all the 1 nows are done. So I don't touch any of the next tags until those ones are done. So the ones are usually empty. It's very rarely full. It's just full now because I'm leaving the group in 2 days. So there's things that need to be done now. And then there's things that are soon, later, and someday. These are just someday, whatever, Crazy idea I got the other day, I write it down as a someday task. Then there's a location of where I do it. So location can be physical, like here I have a work location, this is in the office. I have a town location, this is like when I'm out in town, that I need to get that done, sort out bank stuff. At home, a brain dead tag. For these are things when I'm in a state of utter brain dead and I can't, state and I just cannot do anything. These are the tasks I can do then, right? So these are things that need to be done at a brain dead state, for example. And then I also add a concept called who. This I don't use so much. At who is for a particular person. Notice I have Arno here. Arno is Clayton, Gabriel and I's old boss. And the reason was that Arno's time was very short, so I didn't want to utilize so much of his time. So I would have a task, so every task that I had that was directed to him, I would tag it with his name. This means that when I go for a meeting with Arno, before I go meet him, I check the Arno tag. Of course, there's nothing in the Arno tag right now because I haven't done anything for Arno in a while. But and any things then there, I just quickly refresh. Then I go into the meeting and I'm prepped that if he says, by the way, where is this thing that you asked me to do? I know that that was in that system, so I don't end up in that scenario of damn it, I should have done that. Sorry, I'm totally, completely forgot about it, etc., etc. I don't have a tag in this lab because there's no one where I have that relationship with, but it is quite useful. So just to see what it looks like, so I can now look at my 1 now. So my 1 nows are my end of contract sprint and changes I need to make to the paper. So these are all in the 1 now tag. My 2 next, I need to delete Chrome as it takes up 15 kilobytes of my hard drive space. So this is something I should do probably at some point after I finish. Then I've got things that should be done soon. I have my post-Budget plan. I've got projects set up for Lisbon. I need to start selling my shares, for example. So these are all things that then gets done in that particular order. And if we go all the way to someday, these are I should probably do this computational neural network deep learning course at some point. Someone told me this course is great. So I write it down, I give it the 5 someday tag, and that now sits there until I feel like doing it, which may be at some point. I wanted to one day make my own operating system. These are like weird, weird ass things. Little projects, for example. So this is how I run my project management system, and it should generally have these dimensions, which I do as tags. So if I were to create a new note saying, I don't know, new task, blah, 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 I can then give it a 3 soon tag. This needs to be done at work. And it is for the project, whatever it is. It could be a personal project, right? And now immediately I have 3 dimensions associated with that node. So this is a much more effective way of doing, actually utilizing a functional project management system. And then I have up here somewhere a few shortcuts. Work 1 now is a classic shortcut, which I always click on when I start my day, just to see what it looks like.
Does it give you reminders?
You can add reminders, but that's particular to your thing. I think here I can add, somewhere in here I can add a reminder.
There's a checklist?
There's checklists embedded within the nodes, so I can check these on and off. So that's why then inside the kind of multi-dimensional context, you then have your single to-do lists, for example,
Very nice.
which I then checked in and off. So that's the whole what I mean by multidimensionality. The second thing is that it needs to be accessible from anywhere, meaning that it needs to be cross-platform. So when you're on your cell phone in the middle of town and you get that really amazing idea, you can basically get that onto your system as soon as possible. And if you use like one of these special books, it's usually a good idea to then carry that where you go. Which is why I prefer the online versions, because then that's, we generally carry our cell phone in our pocket. And the final point is this, it's very important. It's called practice, capture, clarify, organize, and reflect. Meaning you actually take the time to capture, means take everything from your mind and convert it to the system. Sometimes you actually have to sit there for half an hour. Usually when I do the workshop, we spend half an hour writing down everything in our mind onto a piece of paper and then creating this organization. Clarify is then determining whether that's something I need to organize or not. Organize is the process of bringing it into your organizational system. And finally, reflect means that every Friday, usually, I go back through everything and I just reshuffle, because you need to reshuffle the tags from 2 to 1. Sometimes they go down hierarchies. Sometimes they can be deleted completely. And yeah. Okay, so that's number 3. That's a really big point that I find is very, very important. Really reduces stress, really improves productivity, and you don't lose things. You don't forget tasks. Things generally get done. Number 4, at least attempt to do inbox 0. Who knows the concept of inbox 0? So some of you. Inbox 0 is the idea that your inbox should be 0 at all times, meaning that it has no messages. So when you read a message, you then do something with the message. You reply to the message, and if it's done, and you don't need to see the message again, you click archive, and you archive that said message. And then eventually, as messages come in, they also go out as you deal with them. So at least attempting to do the inbox 0, where you archive all the messages you've dealt with or are not dealing with now, and delete messages that are completely irrelevant, means that your inbox only contains items that have not been dealt with yet. So this is usually a thing you have to do before you do this, because this becomes your inbox then becomes your internal incoming of tasks. And then if you do it the hardcore way, you convert every inbox message into a project management concept. I only do that with important messages that come in, but a lot of these things that are in here are like flights, tickets that I haven't taken yet, basically. Like booking reservations, something I could do for mum, flight ticket. I think this is some insurance stuff. But these are all things that I just haven't dealt with, right? And I will eventually deal with them, and when I deal with them, I archive them. And if they're a big thing, I bring them up to here, because it's a big, and then I archive it still. So this only contains undealt with items. This just came in new. I will deal with this in its pull request. Number 5, document absolutely everything, and find different ways, because I think people get scared of documentation because there's a lot of effort involved in documentation because you need to write it quite nicely. But when we document everything, I also categorize different types of documentation. So my GitHub wiki, obviously, is just for pure code documentation. And as I'm coding, my wiki is always open, and I update my wiki as I code. Google Drive is kind of more for like non-code based documentation for tiny projects where I want to disseminate. This is slightly more higher effort, right? So I don't use this for general hacking away stuff. That's for like kind of reports and everything that I do. And which is why you need some kind of, also I use Evernote in this case, you need something for like catch-alls and simple sketches. So as I'm working away, my Evernote is also usually open. And so as I'm writing and doing my thing, I'm also populating some Evernote note, just documenting what I've done. This will forever remain, I closed it now. This will kind of forever remain as a, so if we got debug slide, for example, I don't know, let's say this, for example, like style guidelines. That's probably not even a good one. But I like just throw down, I found these 2 really cool websites that are really good for style guiding, toss them down into a note and it's done. Like it's just somewhat there in a BuzzLab note. It can be searchable, but it's there. It's written in a format I'm not internalizing that in my brain. Here I've got some cool AR VR tools that I learned from a student presentation that was done recently. And at the same time, if I want to say, okay, now I want to convert this into a task, I can also then add a tag and task it. And a task can even be, sometimes I add a task saying, convert this into a more high level form of documentation. Convert it into a GitHub thing, or convert it into its own document, or write a website about that said concept. All right. Procrastinate creatively. This means that often it's a good idea to have, in my opinion, to have multiple projects. So you have your primary project and you have other little things that you're working on and hacking away. I feel like we all procrastinate to some point. It's usually really nice when you can harness that procrastination energy into something creative. For example, the production of these slides was done in a procrastination moment. I was tired of working on data collection, data processing. I was really bored of it. I was like, what else? And I wrote these slides 2 weeks ago. And at that moment, I was like, I'm going to make these slides for this presentation. And I was in the mood, I had all these concepts in mind. And I just sat down and used the procrastination time to create these slides. Or I used my procrastination time to then work on a completely different project. And then once you're working on that project, you can then re-procrastinate back into your primary project. So this is a really interesting way of funneling that energy in creative procrastination. That's the way I like to word it. And that usually requires multiple projects. And if you have multiple projects, you need something like this to stop multiple projects getting stressful. So all these kind of things have interlinkages. This is my favorite one, which is you should be trying to sleep at least 8 hours per night. A lot of people tell me that they don't need 8 hours per night. They need 7 hours, 6 hours, some are 5 hours. I went to a really interesting talk recently by this guy called Yuki Motomura. And Yuki does study of sleep deprivation in Japan. Japan is the most sleep deprived nation in the world. Singapore is the second most sleep deprived nation in the world. And he says people commonly say that people don't need the sleep. They're like, oh, you're perfectly fine on 5 or 6 hours of sleep. So what he did was he took a 6 hours, like a sleep, what he classifies as a sleep deprived sleeper, and he force slept them. I don't know how, but he basically forced them to sleep 10 hours, 10-hour nights. Because he has this thing called sleep banking, where actually you become more and more dysfunctional. After having people sleep on 10 hours for a period of about a week, their stress levels decreased enormously, their cognitive performance went up, all these kind of, the ability to perform all these tasks were faster, more accurate, everything was better. So the idea that when people are only sleeping 6 or 7 hours per night, it's because their body has adapted to a more dysfunctional version of themselves. So the body has said, okay, I'm not getting my 8 hours, or I'm not getting my 7 hours. It's probably because the situation's bad, maybe there's a famine, all these things are going. That's okay. I'm going to tone down my brain capacity, I'm going to tone down my functionality, and readapt myself to deal with 6 hours a night. And that means you wake up after 6 hours a night sleep and you're perfectly fine. You feel fine because your body's now adapted to the new norm. But you're actually performing poorly compared to yourself if you had been sleeping to your full capacity. So interestingly, with that study that was done, they also took like 8-hour sleepers, right? They force-slept them, and there was zero increase, nothing changed. So if you take a fully slept person and you put them into forced sleep, you have no increase in performance. But if you take a standard person in the population, there will be an increase in performance because of that whole concept of sleep deprivation. So it's something I take. I sleep 9 hours a night on average. Lately it's been a lot lower and I've been suffering as a result from it, but think about it, I think sleep is really important, especially in the creative world. And also take your holidays and weekends off. This is something that I'm quite passionate about as well. I noticed in Singapore we don't do that so much. And there was a really interesting study done also in Japan, because Japan is one of the worst at this as well. In Microsoft Japan office, they knocked them down to a 4-day weekend, and there was a 40% increase in productivity as a result from that office. And there's a lot of interesting studies showing why this is the case. And I remember I'm not sure if that was the case in Arno's group when you were there, but when I was in Arno's group, this started becoming more of a bigger topic, where it was considered a bad thing if we were working in the weekends. And the reason being is that people that worked in the weekends were then really inefficient at working during the week on those next 5 days, which meant that the person working on the weekend was actually a poor performer. They're like people that are then going to be, as a result, more inefficient during the week. So overall, the lab suffers. So there was kind of this concept of really kind of discouraging the idea of coming in the weekend. Only do it if you really, really absolutely have to, because there's a arty deadline or there's some issue. But try to avoid it. If I were to ever run a lab in the future, I would also make it compulsory to not work weekends, and also make it compulsory to not message people during the weekends. But that's just my own internal mentality. But I strongly think about it, because I know even when I work in this lab, I also work weekends. Because of just the way things are here, somehow the culture has adopted the weekend work culture. I still make an effort in Singapore that one day of my weekend I don't touch work. So at least try to do that. Even when I'm in a high stress, high work mode situation, I still take that one day off. Because otherwise my next 5 days are at a lower productivity than had I had not taken that one day off. And that's just something I can then very logically tell myself, okay, you need to get this done by next week, but you'll get it done better if you take this day off and then work better the next 5 days. So those are my 8 little pointers that I have. And we can open this up for discussion now, because there's 8 points, and maybe you have further questions on one or two of them. Maybe just to summarize again: hack minimal viable products and pivot. The 20-80 rule: add the extra 5%. Get a project management system of some sort if you haven't got one already. Try to do it in box 0. Document everything. One little point with inbox 0: a lot of people in Singapore don't do this, and they always come back to me and say, I lost your email. So do this. And then people don't lose their emails. Document everything. Procrastinate creatively. Sleep 8 hours per night. 7 at least, right? 9 at the most. And take your holidays and weekends off.
Yay! Thanks, BJ.
No worries.
Is there any questions?
I don't understand what is the number 6.
Number 6. Procrastinate creatively. Okay, that's a good question. Do you know what procrastination means? Maybe that's a start. Okay. Procrastination is when you are doing task A, and then you check Facebook or you watch a YouTube video on puppies or something. Because for your brain it's simpler, it's easier, So your mind will navigate towards, if you have the option, do I do this work that I'm not really feeling motivated on doing right now? Or do I watch a YouTube video on puppies, or do I check my Facebook, or do I check something completely, check the news even? That is what's called procrastination. So instead of doing the task at hand, you do something else that has nothing to do with the task at hand. Creative procrastination states, if you give yourself this is an acceptance that procrastination that happens in all people, and people that don't procrastinate are just people that really ridiculously discipline themselves into doing their task, but they're kind of also fighting themselves a tiny bit in that mode of procrastination. So creative procrastination gives you the opportunity to procrastinate, but you do something that is also useful for what you're doing. So in my case, I would have, let's say, my paper is one project that I'm really needing to get done now. But then I have a few little side projects as well. I have this SD4 viewer tool that I'm developing. That's an example of my side procrastination. I have some work I need to do for the Fitbit development. So I have these little pockets of other tasks. And then when I get frustrated of the paper, because everyone does at some point, I go, okay, I'm not doing this now. And instead of the default, which would be check Facebook, check email, check news, I go, I'm going to check my GitHub pull request on Cozy, or I'm going to go make those cubes fly around on the SD4 viewer. I mean, I'm going to make this presentation. This presentation was made on a time of procrastination. I was tired of cleaning data, because cleaning data gets really tiring after a while, and you want to do something else. Boom. This is.
I do things sometimes like I do laundry. Like if I find myself watching YouTube videos or Facebook or something, and I'm like, I just get off my computer. I get away from my computer. I go do something actually useful.
Yeah.
So like, go for a run. Go, spend time doing something that recharges you, or gets something done, makes you feel better. Yeah, creatively is one way to put it. You could say just be productively procrastinating. So
Yeah. And that's a really good point as well, because sometimes, in my opinion, just because I'm into this entire yoga scene and all this stuff now, I see almost procrastination as also like a sign of your body just wanting to change environment. It's like it's done. There's something about that it wants to move away from. So allow it to move. In more classical models, they said you should fight that and stick with what you're doing. I prefer the idea of letting that flow and moving into where your body wants to go, whether it's doing laundry, going for a run. These are all really great things.
Can you go to point 2? 2.2,
Yeah.
number 2.
Oh,
Sorry.
slide.
Slide 2.
Okay.
Or
Slide 3.2.
slide
Yeah,
3.
yeah.
So concepts of like premature optimization, avoiding perfectionism fits into this, right? In a certain sense?
Yeah. So I think in like a PhD context, I think a lot of people get stuck trying to get that like perfect PhD, and then they end up really digging in. He's fine.
You're okay.
But
You're okay.
but like or you just need to get something in.
So I mean, there's a saying, a famous programmer says that premature optimization is the root of all evil, and I believe that too. I think that if you're spending tons of time on detail that you don't even know is useful or important yet, then you're something that could take a month takes a year.
Yeah.
I think this is really smart people often have struggles with this, especially engineers, computer scientists, who want it to be perfect. I mean, there's this weird drive towards technical perfectionism for some people, and people that are really good in private sector and business don't have that problem. They get things done, they close deals, they ship. Real artists ship, right? That's something that I think we should keep in mind when you're working on something. Take a step back once in a while, determine if what you're doing is really necessary optimization.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's something I learned from basically doing design consulting, like engineering design consulting, because you just do not have the time, and then you realize the client doesn't even care, right? So and even with their concept, when a client comes and says, "Hey, I want this water bottle," right? I don't give them the water bottle on perfect, the rim on the edge. I first give them, a really like concept fundamental sketch, and then from that start iterating in 2080 iterations, which really tunes on to point one of just get your 2080 on that, and then 28 every subsequent step, and don't forget to add the 5% of documentation and everything else.
It's cool. I like that extra 5%.
Yeah, and that's also it's something I learned in Switzerland when I was kind of designing stuff for a company, where I realized that there's more of a value of things looking nice and functioning well, and that's where that extra like 5%, which in my previous life didn't seem like it was so important, suddenly became very important, and I only saw the value of it 3 to 5 years later when I now go back to those companies and they're still using the same products and everything is still there, and it's just that extra 5% allowed it to be not converted from a 6-month technology to a multi like a 20-year.
Cool. Great. Thanks, PJ.
No worries.
Yay. So let's stop the video.